Hi, Barbara. Hi, Steve. Hi, Kay. Hope you all are doing well tonight. Hi, Lana. Great to see you too. One more share and I'll start up. Yeah, I know you mean Barbara Reed. Okay, glad to see you too. Okay, so I'm sorry. I couldn't resist impeachment tonight. I just got to say some things about impeachment. I was having dinner with Bonnie, and I've been watching some things today and some things yesterday. And I don't know. I got a lot of opinions about it. So I decided to let them all come out tonight. Uh, to say I'm extremely ambivalent about the whole thing would be the understatement of the year. So, as a foil, let's start. Oh, hi, Steve. Good to see you. Kay says she's been talking online with my Boomers for Bernie groups tonight. Cool. Yeah, Boomers for Bernie are fairly old by now. So maybe the piece that I did on how much money we'd all save if Bernie passed his whole agenda would be of interest to that group. Okay. Anyway, getting on with the business of tonight, I want to start by sharing an article from Alexis Goldstein, a former activist, okay, in Occupy, and before then, I guess, a former Wall Streeter. I don't think she was a Wall Streeter for very long. Uh, anyway, her article in Truth Out: Impeachment of Trump appears inevitable in the House, and put this on clearly so we don't get distracted by all the stuff that goes on. She points out that the House Judiciary Committee convened Wednesday, it was yesterday, of course, for 8.5 hours of testimony to discuss what the Constitution requires for impeachment. It was an exercise that didn't reveal any new information on the investigation, but rather laid out the legal justification for Trump's potential impeachment. The hearing underscored that any eventual impeachment will most likely be partisan. The Judiciary Committee Republicans continued the House GOP's approach of raising procedural complaints and bad faith attacks on the Democratic witnesses, while the Republican witness argued there isn't sufficient evidence to justify impeaching Trump. But Democrats made a strong case for the obligation Congress has to impeach given Trump's conduct. The three Democratic witnesses all argued that Trump has not only committed impeachable offenses, but that the gravity of the president's abuse of power made impeachment utterly necessary. The House Judiciary majority appeared to telegraph its articles of impeachment by walking the Democratic witnesses through a series of high crimes and asking if Trump committed them, specifically abuse of power, bribery, obstruction of Congress, and obstruction of justice. Later reporting by CNN appears to confirm these are precisely the articles Democrats are considering, with the ultimate say on the article's structure being determined by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Uh-oh. From the beginning of the hearing, Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler stressed the urgency of action. Quote, if we do not act to hold him in check now, unquote, Nadler said in his opening statement, quote, again, President Trump will almost certainly try again to solicit interference in the election for his personal political benefit, unquote. Democrats appear poised to take this warning seriously and move forward quickly. Too bad they didn't do this in January of 2019. According to Politico, in a meeting with Democratic lawmakers about impeachment, Nancy Pelosi asked, quote, are you ready, unquote. And the members, quote, overwhelmingly, unquote, said yes. In an announcement Thursday morning, Pelosi said she's asking the House Judiciary Committee to, quote, proceed with preparing articles of impeachment, unquote, noting that during the Constitutional Convention, the Constitutional Convention, Constitutional Convention, Gouverneur Morris said, quote, the magistrate is not the king. The people are the king. It's been a long time since the people were the king, I fear. But okay, that was an aspirational statement then, and it's an aspirational statement now. When House Democratic Counsel Norm Eisen asked Noah Feldman of Harvard Law School if Trump committed abuse of power, Feldman agreed he had. Feldman said Trump had used, quote, the awesome power of his office, unquote, in order to, quote, serve his personal, individual, partisan, electoral interests, unquote, when he took congressionally appropriated aid hostage in order to solicit investigations into Joe Biden. Michael Gerhardt from University of North Carolina added, quote, they're talking about an abuse of power that only the president could commit, unquote. He said Trump undertook a, quote, systematic, concerted effort, unquote, to, quote, again, remove people that would somehow obstruct or block his ability to put that pressure on Ukraine to get an announcement of an investigation, unquote. So we have to be clear that what the Democrats are claiming is that the prize here that Trump was trying to get was an announcement of an investigation. It wasn't an investigation. It wasn't the outcome of an investigation. It was merely a public announcement of an investigation by Ukraine of Joe Biden. something that Trump and his campaign could use to smear the Bidens with, right? Pamela Karlan of Stanford Law School told Eisen she believed Trump committed a bribery. In explaining why, Karlan highlighted what she thought was the, quote, most chilling line of the scandal when EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland admitted that Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, wasn't concerned about an investigation being started or completed. What Giuliani and Trump wanted was a public announcement of an investigation. So we can infer from this language that Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, was conveying, or Gordon Sondland, based on his knowledge, was saying that Rudy Giuliani wasn't concerned about an investigation being started or completed. That what Giuliani and Trump wanted was a public announcement of an investigation. So Sondland did not actually hear Trump asking for a public announcement, but Trump's personal lawyer thought that Trump wanted a public announcement of an investigation. That's a personal lawyer who has not come in to testify yet and who has not been forced yet to come in to testify. So, this made it clear to Karlan that, quote, this was not about whether Vice President Biden actually committed corruption or not, unquote, but instead this was about injuring somebody who the president thinks of as a particularly hard opponent, unquote. That last one made me laugh. I'm very skeptical that Joe Biden is going to be a particularly hard opponent for President Trump. The Representative Ted Lieu, Democrat of California, noted later in the hearing that while he believes Trump's conduct meets the standard for criminal bribery, impeachment is a civil proceeding, and thus the conduct examined does not need to, quote, meet the standards of a federal bribery statute in order to be impeachable. I think Ted Lieu is correct in making that point. That, of course, is a separate question, okay, as to whether it would be politically sufficient to impeach a president on evidence that did not meet the standards of a federal bribery statute. Okay, in other words, the legal requirement for the Congress to impeach may not be the same as the political requirement to get the Republicans in the Senate on board so that Trump can be convicted, which is perhaps the object of this whole thing, or if it's not the object, then the object of it is certainly to create such a political spectacle that everybody will want Trump gone as soon as possible, and that this would then be perhaps a great advantage for the Democrats in the upcoming elections. This might be the kind of thinking that's motivating Nancy Pelosi. I don't know if that's true, but this might be the kind of thinking. When asked by Eisen if Trump committed obstruction of Congress, Gerhardt, one of the witnesses on the Democratic side from the University of North Carolina, agreed he had, and noted that in the Nixon impeachment, House Article 3 charged him with misconduct because he failed to comply with 4 legislative subpoenas, while Trump had defied far more than 4 subpoenas in this impeachment inquiry. Okay. I think this is a very good point. In other words, it may be difficult to meet the standards of a federal bribery statute in order to make the case that Trump was guilty, of bribery, in this instance. But on its face, it's certainly true that Trump has failed to comply with a great many subpoenas. On the question of obstruction of justice, Gerhardt noted that, quote, the Mueller report cites a number of facts that indicate the President of the United States obstructed had justice. That's true, but it's notable that the Mueller report did not actually produce any prima facie evidence implicating the president in a conspiracy with the Russians to actually swing the election to himself. Of course, we have the public evidence that he invited the Russians in, and this perhaps by itself constitutes a violation. But of course, the Democrats already have that evidence. While the obstruction of justice relates to subpoenas to gather other evidence. Okay, so there is the problem that the underlying crime that the Mueller investigation was pointed at has never been the subject of evidence that was brought before the American public. And now, of course, all the intelligence agencies appear to agree that there was something wrong there. The Russians intervened, in our election, and so on. But no agency or party within the federal government has seen fit to reveal that evidence to us, to the American public. So from the point of view of making a political case, the citation of the Mueller report doesn't do very much to move the needle, I don't believe. Anyway, Gerhardt also agreed with Eisen that Trump's, quote, pardon dangling and witness tampering are also evidence of obstruction of justice. I think that's clearly true. That's clearly true. So once again, the cover-up perhaps is worse than the crime, as it was in the Nixon case. And I have no doubt that all kinds of obstruction of justice and obstruction of Congress have been going on in this respect, but I don't know if we need any witnesses to tell us that. It's all been very, very public, and still is. Carlin noted that when Trump told Ukrainian President Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, quote, I would like you to do us a favor, though, unquote. On July 25th, Trump, quote again, was using the royal we. It wasn't a favor for the United States, Carlin then added that, quote, again, only kings say us when they mean me, unquote. Well, I have to say, that's a thin reed to hang a conclusion on. When Trump left the North Atlantic Treaty Organization summit early after being laughed at by fellow NATO leaders, he wasted no time in getting back on Twitter, where he appeared to respond to Carlin's argument, tweeting his explanation for using the word us, quote unquote. He said, "With the word us, I am referring to the United States," unquote. So I suppose the retort to that could simply be, Trump says, "L'État, c'est moi." I am the state. I am the United States. And then went on to explain in a subsequent tweet, quote, "This, based on what I have seen, is their big point. And it is no point at all, except for a big win for me." Unquote. Of course, that comes from Mr. I am perfect. It appears Carlin's point got to Trump. Perhaps so. Throughout the hearing, the Democratic witnesses stressed the consequences of not impeaching Trump. Gerhardt warned, if what we're talking about isn't impeachable, then nothing is impeachable. And Feldman argued that if a president cannot be impeached for abusing the power of the presidency for personal gain, then we no longer live in a democracy. We live in a monarchy, or we live under a dictatorship. Well, I think that's certainly a true statement, but I think it's also true that there are all sorts of things that Trump has done which are impeachable, and with respect to which it may be said, quote, if what we're talking about isn't impeachable, then nothing is impeachable. So why is the Congress, and specifically the House, why is the House only focusing on the Ukraine situation? Okay, and the claim that Trump, but not only solicited, but practically forced a bribe. He certainly has done similar things in many, many other situations. And he certainly has performed all kinds of actions which are impeachable because they're violations, of international law, because they're violations of human rights. Republican witness Jonathan Turley from George Washington University Law School argued that the committee should slow down in order to hear from more, quote, fact witnesses who observed Trump's alleged conduct, witnesses who have thus far refused to appear in defiance of subpoenas. This echoed a complaint by ranking member Doug Collins, Republican of Georgia, who said, quote, let's bring fact witnesses in, unquote. The problem is many, quote, fact witnesses, unquote, in the Trump administration have refused to appear under orders from the Trump administration. So, of course, this is all circular. Nadler had highlighted this blockade, quote unquote, earlier in the hearing with Gerhardt, who said that, quote, full-scale obstruction of those subpoenas, I think, torpedoes separation of powers, unquote. I certainly agree with that. And that Congress must work to protect their, quote, institutional prerogatives, unquote. And one way to do so is through impeachment. I completely agree, but the other way to do so, of course, is not to vote any money for federal activities. Congress also has that particular power. But Let's be very clear. Impeachment is one remedy, but it would have been a remedy for full scale obstruction of subpoenas about any subject on which the Congress may have sought information from Donald Trump, such as Donald Trump's tax returns, such as Donald Trump's financial interests, which he has refused to divest himself of. How do we know, for example, whether Trump treated the migrants from south of the border so cruelly because he thought that was in the interest of the United States, or whether he treated them so cruelly because he may have substantial investments in the private prison industry, and the prison that industry, of course, was profiting from Trump's very but cruel treatment of the migrants. We don't know, without knowing what Trump's financial interests are. We're in no position to judge whether his actions may be in search of his own profit rather than in search of the national interests of the United States. Turley's argument on Wednesday was quite different from when he argued in favor of the Clinton impeachment in 1998, when he said, quote, "You need both political and legal legitimacy to govern," unquote, and that Clinton had, quote, "deprived himself of the perceived legitimacy to govern," unquote. I think, looking back on Clinton, okay, in 1998, okay, and also the legitimacy to govern that he had, okay, at that time, I believe that it is far greater than, or was far greater than, the legitimacy that Trump has now to govern. Okay, and also the legitimacy that Trump has ever had during his whole period in the presidency. I mean, less than half the country has approved of his presidency from the time he was elected until now. Whereas Clinton's approval ratings, even during the depths of the impeachment, are higher than Trump's are now. Turley's claim seems a very empty claim in that particular context. He was concerned about the political and the legal, legitimacy to govern then, but he has no concern about that at this time. When Trump was elected by the Electoral College and lost the popular vote by 3 million, Turley was not concerned about the political legitimacy that Trump had to govern at that time. He wasn't concerned about the political authority or legitimacy that the Electoral College had. Now, the Electoral College may have the legal It may cover the legal base when it comes to legitimacy because the Constitution is the Constitution. But clearly, I think, from the viewpoint of the American people, winning the popular vote makes you a more legitimate president than winning the Electoral College does. At least in terms of someone who can wield a degree, of moral authority with the public. When we consider the course of Trump's presidency since that time, he has always hovered at well under 50%, in approval rating. And there's always been a very large and intense amount of opposition to his presidency. From the start, his very presidency has divided the country from the start and has been dividing it every day since. Turley seems to have no concern about that. Republicans in the committee used every crumb of an opportunity to direct false outrage at the Democratic witnesses, likely playing for clips on Fox News. In some cases, though, it backfired. Representative Matt Gaetz, who's a Republican from Florida, tried to undercut Feldman by raising that in May of 2019, Feldman wrote an article called, quote, "It's hard to take impeachment seriously now," unquote. This backfired spectacularly, as Feldman pointed out that he was an impeachment skeptic up until the July 25th call. That was the call to the Ukraine. Quote, "The call changed my mind, sir, and for good reason," unquote, Feldman said. In his opening statement, Collins said the assembled law professors would be speaking on things, quote, "they couldn't have possibly actually digested yet." In a moment that took off on social media, Carlin parried back that she was, quote, "insulted," unquote, because she, quote, "read transcripts of every one of the witnesses who appeared in the live hearing because I would not speak about these things without reviewing the facts," unquote. But just for the record, I doubt that Collins, the ranking member of the committee for the Republicans, has read the transcripts of every one of the witnesses who appeared in the live hearing. I seriously doubt that. The first day of the Judiciary Committee's impeachment hearings left both parties firmly entrenched. The Republicans dedicated themselves to raising whatever concerns they can to delay the process. Democrats focused on the dangers of not acting on abuse of power. Impeachment appears inevitable in the House. What happens next in the Senate will likely be determined by how the public continues to feel about impeachment. As of December 4th, more than 47.8% of Americans favor impeachment and 44% are opposed, according to an aggregation of polls by 538. Democrats have now made the legal case for impeachment, and impeachment articles will be prepared. It doesn't look good for Trump in the court of public opinion. Now, about that last sentence, one might say, well, it doesn't look good for Trump in the sense that more people are in favor of impeachment than are opposed to impeachment. However, we have to note that 47.8% of Americans favoring impeachment is a plurality, not a majority of Americans. And it's very far from a supermajority of Americans. Now, there are precedents, of course, specifically in the Nixon case, when impeachment articles were written, when the impeachment hearings were going on, before the articles, were written, actually, I don't know if there was a chance to actually draft. I think the articles were drafted, but I don't think the impeachment of Nixon was actually made. Instead, as I recall, a delegation of congressional leaders went to him and said, look, this impeachment is going to pass. It's going to be bipartisan. And when it comes to the Senate, we don't have the votes to hold it off. It's going to pass the Senate. Whereupon they got the resignation of Nixon just a few days later. However, by that time, the American people, there were a majority of the American people who favored impeachment. This was after a long process of hearings, an inquiry, in which the American people were exposed to lots and lots of evidence, with respect to Nixon. That case suggests that the more the American people is exposed to evidence, the more the climate is likely to shift against the president. So maybe it doesn't look good for Trump in the court, of public opinion. But in the case, of Bill Clinton, of course, the articles of impeachment were actually drafted, in that instance. And the impeachment actually went to the Senate, where it failed by a large margin because it was a partisan impeachment. And through the hearings in the House and through the actions that followed in the Senate, the popularity of Bill Clinton began to increase, and the Republicans began to look very, very silly as time went on. And Clinton emerged from the impeachment proceeding more popular than when he went in. So that is my memory, of that particular situation. So I'll grant that it doesn't look as good for Trump now as it did for Clinton then. But one has to be wary of what happened in that particular situation, and one has to note that Trump and his allies have great power with their media machine. Well, they're part of the media machine. And they will lie, and spread all kinds, of misinformation, as will the opposing media machine, of the Democrats. So, in that fog of war, whatever truth there is to this whole situation is likely to be firmly cast out of the public sphere. Let's move on to our second article. If my computer will allow me to move on. I think it will. That's an editorial by William Rivers Pitt. Of Truth Out, published on December 4th, which was yesterday. I'll put that into Clearly also. The article is called Republicans' Alternative, quote, report, unquote, does nothing to refute the Impeachment report. That's the report of the Intelligence Committee, the House Intelligence Committee, after an autumn of accusation and acrimony that included 2 damning weeks of testimony from a variety of witnesses. The House Intelligence Committee on Tuesday afternoon released its report documenting the impeachment investigation into the activities of Donald Trump in Ukraine. The information contained within is intended as a baseline for the drafting of articles of impeachment against Trump. Okay, which is a duty that will fall upon Representative Gerald Nadler and the members of his House Judiciary Committee shortly. The report coming in at 300 pages long, including 150 pages of 150 pages of meticulously organized notes, got directly to the point in its preface. President Trump personally and acting through agents within and outside of the U.S. government solicited the interference of a foreign government, Ukraine, to benefit the re-election of the president. The president engaged in this course of conduct for the benefit of his own presidential re-election, to harm the election prospects of a political rival, and to influence our nation's upcoming presidential election to his advantage. Doing so, the president placed his own personal and political interests above the national interests of the United States, sought to undermine the integrity of the U.S. presidential election process, and endangered U.S. national security. The report explains in ruthless detail the manner in which Trump and his various minions, including personal attorney Rudy Giuliani and European Union Ambassador Gordon Sondland, attempted to strong arm Ukraine into doing Trump's electoral bidding. Compounding Trump's Ukraine transgressions, according to the report, have been his ceaseless attempts to obstruct the investigation, and indeed any form of oversight Congress has attempted to execute. Now, from my point of view, that's the most serious of the charges, his ceaseless attempts to obstruct the investigation and any form of oversight Congress has attempted to execute, because there is the violation of the separation of powers of the United States. There is the violation of the oath of office that Trump has taken. That's why this impeachment is such a serious matter. Congress should be impeaching him for that. I think the specific actions in the Ukraine are secondary to the cover-up, as they were in the Nixon case. Quote, the damage to our system of checks and balances, reads the report, quote again, and to the balance of power within our 3 branches of government will be long-lasting and potentially irrevocable if the president's ability to stonewall Congress goes unchecked. Any future president will feel empowered to resist an investigation into their own wrongdoing, malfeasance, or corruption, and the result will be a nation at far greater risk of all 3. Unquote. I very much agree with that. I also think it is long overdue, long overdue, that the Congress has exercised, okay, its own power in order to prevent violations by the executive of separation of powers as written into the Constitution. For example, the president has done this routinely with respect to the war power, taking the war power on himself. I don't mean just Trump. I mean Obama. Okay. I mean Bill Clinton. I mean all the presidents back to Harry Truman. I know some of you will say, so what's the big deal? If presidents have done this for so long and the world hasn't come to an end, then why get excited about it now? Because, according to the Constitution, it's fundamentally wrong. And where does it lead? It leads here. It leads to presidents who believe they can get away with violating all sorts of things that are prohibited by the Constitution. It leads to presidents who say, we are above the law, as Nixon is reputed to have contended in his theory of the Constitution. And as Trump has said any number of times, that he's the president. While he's the president, he can do whatever he wants to do. That is not what the Constitution says. And the proof that it doesn't say that is in the impeachment power. I think it is enough to impeach Trump based on his violation of separation of powers. I wish the Congress would stand up and would say that, and that every member of Congress would. There is no question that this president routinely violates separation of powers, and has done so since he took the presidency. It is long past time that Congress stop him. Notably, the House Intelligence Report does not recommend any specific articles of impeachment, though several are obliquely suggested. On Monday, the Washington Post reported that House Democrats are debating whether to add impeachment articles specifically related to Trump's obstruction of justice in the Mueller investigation or emoluments violations. I would advise in this respect to forget the Mueller investigation. In other words, it's obvious he obstructed justice in that investigation, but it is not obvious that there were any violations to uncover in the Mueller investigation. So leave it at obstruction of justice in that investigation. And I think they should talk as much as they can about emoluments violations and obstruction of justice with respect to those, because they can probably put together a list of 50 emoluments violations without talking to a single witness. Also notable, the report does not use the word bribery, quote unquote, except to quote Trump and Giuliani accusations against the Bidens and the whistleblower. After weeks of deploying the Latin phrase quid pro quo, quote unquote, to describe Trump's illegal actions in Ukraine, Democrats finally began saying bribery, quote unquote, in connection with Trump's activities. likely because that word is specifically mentioned in the Constitution as an impeachable offense. The absence of such pointedly specific language in this report is disquieting if it signals a rhetorical retreat by Democrats, but such concerns will be forestalled if that language eventually appears in the articles of impeachment themselves. William Rivers Pitt thinks the House Intelligence Committee report is a strong document, but says it is difficult to imagine how it could be otherwise. And then he compliments Committee Chairman Adam Schiff for doing a masterful job of managing the public testimony of key witnesses. Uh, in the face of boulder dash eruptions from the likes of Devin Nunez and Jim Jordan. Yeah, Jim Jordan was prominent also yesterday in the delivery of some boulder dash eruptions. The report is the issue of that endeavor and stands as a pivot point for the next phase of the impeachment proceedings. Day before the release of the report, the Republicans attempted to blot out the sun with a multiple megaton manure bomb they passed off as their own impeachment hearings report. This 110-page ball of sweaty drivel is the culmination, I think he mixed his metaphors there, is the culmination of years of Breitbart bubble GOP conspiracy mongering. Publicly available and irrefutable evidence shows how senior Ukrainian government officials sought to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential election in opposition to President Trump's candidacy, unquote. Reads the Republican rebuttal report, quote again, and that some in the Ukrainian embassy in Washington worked with a Democrat operative to achieve that goal, unquote. It's the dramatic insertion of, quote, irrefutable, unquote, that makes this art. The addled accusation that Ukraine attempted to thwart Trump's election in 2016 has been debunked more times than the flat earth theory. It is laughable on its face. More than anything else, Ukraine needs to keep its relationship with the U.S. thoroughly bipartisan if it wishes to survive a Russian aggression campaign that has already captured Crimea. If the Ukraine sticks a toe into the fractious water of U.S. election politics, like as not, they'd lose the whole leg. The GOP's blatherskite-riddled report is a triumph of noise over substance. It should be carved word for word on the tombstone of the Republican Party if and when that belfry of an organization finally collapses under the weight of its own well-heeled inadequacies. I think the same could be leveled at the Democratic Party when that bat belfry of an organization finally collapses under the weight of its own well-heeled inadequacies. Did you see the antics of Hillary Clinton on the Howard Stern show? The bitter complaints against what Bernie Sanders did during the election of 2016? That he should have kissed the ring months earlier. It wasn't enough to humiliate him at the convention. What an entitled person. The worst part, Republicans know their report is a raft of lies, specifically about Ukraine election interference. The GOP-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee has said so in broad daylight. But Trump's defenders, will fountain its gibberish to all points on the compass regardless, because they're playing to an audience of one, as the Eagles foretold. They're all but prisoners here of their own device. The impeachment train has a few more stops to make before it reaches a trial in the Senate. The House Judiciary Committee, which currently endures a platoon of GOP nonsense mongers like Doug Collins and Louis Gohmert, Matt Gaetz, Andy Biggs, and Jim Jordan, is set to become a deliberately disrupted shit show of historic proportions. When the smoke clears, the committee's Democratic majority will present articles of impeachment for a vote. Like as not, those articles will be approved by the committee. After that, a full vote of the House on those articles will come. Almost certain to break along party lines, the Democratic House majority will carry the day, and Donald Trump will officially be impeached. At which point, the show moves to the Senate domain of Mitch McConnell for a trial to decide whether Trump will be removed from office. And what Mitch McConnell does in this trial may determine the fate of his reelection campaign in Kentucky. I am, of course, not sanguine about the final outcome. Impeachment is a political exercise, and Trump has Senate Republicans wrapped so tightly around his finger that his fingernail is turning blue. All that, however, is for a day yet to come. The case for impeachment has been made beyond question or doubt, and the House Intelligence Committee report is the sum and substance of the argument for Trump's ultimate removal. It is a document of historic merit. Well, I'm not sure I agree with that particular verdict on the Intelligence Committee report. Uh, as I said, I think it's a simple matter to document the obstruction of justice, both in the Ukraine case and in the case of the Mueller investigation. But I think it's also true that the underlying high crimes, and misdemeanors in these two cases, the evidence for those has not established the crimes beyond question or doubt. It seems to me that without the testimony of someone who was in the room and who can testify to what exactly it was that Trump said to Zelensky or Zelensky. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on old Vladimir's name here. Actually, Volodymyr. Volodymyr Zelensky, I think, is the name, of the Ukrainian president. Anyway, as far as I know, they don't yet have the public testimony of someone who can say firsthand what Trump actually communicated to the Ukrainian president. And so we don't have, as yet, a direct evidence of the but claimed violation in the Ukraine case. On the other hand, we have all kinds of evidence of obstruction of Congress and obstruction, of justice. So those aspects, are strong. But as I said before, and as I'll continue to say here, it is vital that if Democrats want to win the political war that they have started on this, for better or for worse, I think they have to go beyond the Ukraine situation and go beyond the Mueller investigation to Trump's abuses of power with regard to the Emoluments Clause and with regard to other activities in the foreign policy sphere, which certainly seem to be dictated by his own personal interest and specifically expectation, of profits, rather than guided by any conception of what was in the national interest of the United States. I think the full list of the violations of the Emoluments Clause should be made public. I think further that this list should be used to beat Trump over the head and to make it clear to the American people that Trump is a crook, that they elected a crook to the presidency, that they have a criminal running the United States right now. That's a political case that can be made, just as it was with Nixon. That is the simple case that they have to make by listing the various ways in which he has profited from the presidency, in which he has profited from rejecting the tradition of putting his interests in a blind trust and not participating in businesses during the time of his presidency and not profiting from those businesses. Trump has radically departed from the previous practices of our presidents. And in doing so, he has committed all of the corrupting acts which were feared by the founders and which the Constitution was designed to prevent and designed to punish through the impeachment process. I know the Democrats are not bringing these forth because they're afraid that to do so will implicate other presidents and other office holders and many of their own. But that is too bad. In order to get beyond the hypocritical statements of the rule of law that many Democrats have been making during these particular proceedings, and the high-flown statements of Nancy Pelosi that we've been continuously getting lately, in order to prove the sincerity of those statements, Trump has to be impeached for things that will matter to people. Now, I believe that proof that Trump is basically a criminal and a racketeer would matter to the American people. That would swing impeachment over to the Democrat side in the political battle. It would also expose the corrupting influence of money in our politics. But what it would also do, and more importantly so, is that it would truly reframe this fight as one involving the defense of the Constitution against the criminal who has taken over the government of the United States and who ignores a variety of laws that exist to constrain the government and to constrain the executive branch of government in particular. I think the Democrats should have started impeachment proceedings on January 1st of 2019. Had they done so, there would have been ample time to make this case. Ample time to make this case. They could have brought in all the violations. By now, it would be apparent to all of the American people, except the extreme Trump followers, the cult-like Trump followers, that what they had in the White House, what they had elected to the White House, not by a majority vote, not even by a plurality, but by a minority, that person was chosen badly, that they were deceived, that they chose a criminal. I think the American public needs to be brought face to face with that. Right now, they're being brought face to face with the idea that Trump violated the Constitution and the bribery prohibitions in the Constitution. But that's all. People who favor Trump can brush that off as a fairly minor incident. There can be lots of right-wing talking points that point to this case or that case or the other case where Democrats try to influence foreign leaders in order to gain support here at home. And they can create fog in this situation with various arguments over that. But they would not be able to create that kind of fog in relation to an overwhelming list of corruption violations by this administration. And this is not just about corruption by this administration. It's about corruption by the billionaires in this administration. It's about billionaire administration. It's about the corruption of money in politics. That's what the Democrats don't want to bring forward right now. And that's what must be brought forward. If any good at all is to come out of this impeachment, that's the narrative that has to come, okay, to dominate it. This impeachment is about the central issue of our age when it comes to governance, and that is whether we'll be governed by corrupt oligarchies or whether we will be governed by popular democracy, doing what people need to have done. So that's the narrative. That's the story that we have to bring to the forefront. Please share, like, and subscribe when my YouTube goes up in a half hour. And please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I will now consider your comments and questions. I just had to get that rant out, folks. Sorry. Steve says, watch Jimmy Dore show on impeachment, okay, a couple hours ago. Was it better than my treatment, Steve? And Kay says, yes, they are very cool. I'm 66. Steve says, very good, but fast forward through the movie review of The Irishman. Bonnie's joined. Steve says, me too. Kay says, I think they should have started the impeachment thing a long time before now. He just keeps pushing all his agenda. Emoluments is a big one and started right away. Absolutely. And that wouldn't have taken many witnesses. Louisa Connors joined. Hi, Louisa. And Dale Weaver joined. Hi, Dale. And Kay says this whole impeachment didn't start until he attacked Joe Biden. Think about that. Their favorite corporate candidate. Yes, I know. I know. Sorry not to have mentioned that. Kathy Langan joined. Kay joined again. Cheyenne joined. Steve says, the woman professor that brought up Trump's kid was horrible. I didn't think she was horrible because she brought up Trump's kid. She didn't actually bring up Trump's kid. Well, I know she mentioned his name, but that was not her intent. Was not to bring up Trump's kid. Her intent was to bring up Trump's desire for monarchy, so that he could name his kid a baron or do whatever else he wanted to in the old fashion, okay, of monarchy. I thought that was a valid point, and I don't think she should have apologized for bringing up his name. I think she should have stuck to her guns and drove that point home, because what Trump is after is dictatorship, and it is monarchy, or something akin to it. possibly much worse. So I didn't think she was horrible about that. What she was horrible at was that when she started talking foreign policy, which she has no expertise in. Where's her PhD in international relations? Where's her PhD in foreign policy? What right does she have to say that it's in the national interests of the United States to take the part of Ukraine against Russia? Why is that in the national interest of the United States? I mean, the question is not whether Trump's action in withholding the military aid was within the interests of the United States or not within the interests of the United States. The question is whether he undertook that action in order to get the government of the Ukraine to announce an investigation of Joe Biden, so that he then could smear Biden here. That was the point. But no, she raised, oh, he did something against the interest of the United States because it's in the interest of the United States to support the Ukraine. That's beyond her area of expertise. She wasn't called to testify about that. Steve said, bad day for Yang and Biden campaigns. Yang did whipped cream porn. Biden called voter old and fat. And Steve says, okay, I'll shut up now. No need to shut up, Steve. Kay says, I didn't hear about Yang, but Biden screws up almost every time he opens his mouth. Yeah, and he gets away with it, too. He's another one who's Teflon, who can say the stupidest things. Get away with saying the stupidest things. People don't seem to ever learn. I mean, hopefully, we're just in the process of getting rid of Trump. We don't need somebody else who says the stupidest and most harmful things. And worse than that, according to his record, makes extremely harmful decisions. Tom Hartman said that the GOP professor from GWU is a contributor on faux news. It fits. Well, I wouldn't convict him just because of that, but there is an article which appeared in The Nation today. I can leave a link to that article if you want. I didn't want to cover it because it would take too long to cover, but it's worth reading. Hang on a second. Title of the article is The Republican Star Impeachment Scholar is a Shameless Hack. That is about Jonathan Turley, of course, and the article outlines all the ways in which John Turley, who can argue very compellingly on constitutional questions, by the way, but of course, it outlines in which ways he is a shameless hack. So, the article was written, by Elie Mistal. And it appeared today at 10:47 a.m. It's got some real high points I don't have the time to go through, but I will leave the link for you. And there's Ocasio-Cortez waving. That's you. I will go back here. Okay, and I'll leave that link for you. Hang on a second. Okay. And Tom Pittman joined, Alan Scott joined. Kate Clark Ryan says, I like Truth Out. Yes, I love Truth Out too, Kate Clark Ryan. Unfortunately, I'm all too familiar with that jerk, Jim Jordan. He should be run out on a rail for his OSU wrestling team scandal. Oh, I didn't know about that. I hate having to be back in GOP ruined Ohio again. And Dolores joined again. Barbara Wernick has joined. Hi, Barbara. And Steve Wolfbrand said, did Biden do the same thing Trump did? Uh, you mean but try to profit from his position, okay, as vice president? Well, Biden said that he did nothing to try to profit, uh, and I don't know what the actual case against him is. Supposedly, the Ukraine actually did investigate that situation. Okay, at one point. Okay, and they decided. Okay, there was nothing to it, and the Senate Foreign Intelligence Committee also looked into it, and they didn't think, okay, there was any corruption there, okay, as well. I'm not in a position to say whether there was, but I think the thing to keep in mind is this: uh, there was no obstruction of justice on Biden's part, as far as we can see, to stop investigations, okay, unless you think that the dismissal of the Ukrainian prosecutor that Biden was involved in was an obstruction of justice on his part. If so, then of course that would have to be investigated, because he did get the prosecutor fired. Kay says, I think it was close, Steve. Jeff Ginter has joined. Hi, Jeff. Kay says, I agree with you, Joe. I loved that woman, Carlin. Well, thanks, but I don't think you probably agreed with my later comment about her and foreign policy. But Bonnie and I did like her actually a lot in terms of some of the things she said. I think if she had stuck to the legalities of it, she would have been all right. She's a very strong legal mind. I just think she should keep her nose out of foreign policy, except insofar perhaps as she's an expert in the international law area. And Steve says, Joe, watch your Jamie Dore show on impeachment. You'll learn a lot. Fast forward through the movie review. Well, I watch Jimmy Dore quite often, so I will take a look at that, Steve. I like Jimmy. Biden was downright nasty to that guy today. I am starting to dislike him. Yeah, he was downright nasty. He's extremely defensive when it comes to any suggestion that his son did anything wrong, or that he did anything wrong in connection with his son. That's because Joe Biden comes from the old school. That's another reason why we don't need to have him in the presidency. He's another instance of an old school politician who were taught never to admit when they were wrong, or never to admit when they made a mistake about anything, but to always defend themselves with a good offense, defend themselves by attacking somebody else. That's the way Joe Biden is. He thinks that's scrappy. He thinks that's street fighting. He thinks he's a street fighter. That's what's going on there. You see, this guy personally threatened him, okay, by bringing that up. So he decided to be downright nasty to him in return. When, of course, what he needed was a good answer. He needed a good answer. He needs a good answer. He can't keep on ignoring these things without people beginning to think that there's some fire there. And Kay says, I've never liked Biden. Look at his voting history. Yes, I agree. Steve says, I think if Bernie gets bogged down in the Senate trial, AOC will run his rallies for him. Hope so. Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, the combination of Ro Khanna and AOC, okay, and Rashida and Ilhan, and also the inimitable Nina Turner, but running his rallies for him, and Ben Cohn making them all ice cream socials, he'd be number one in Iowa in no time. I think he's going to be number one in Iowa anyway. I just tuned in this evening on a town hall he was having, okay, with organic farmers, okay, in Iowa, and he was just terrific. He was just terrific on that. I mean, I think Bernie's going to win Iowa. I don't really have much doubt on that. I don't think Buttigieg has any staying power. I don't think he'll be very popular when February 3rd comes around. Kay says Bernie is still going everywhere, full tilt boogie. Laugh out loud. He has more energy than I do for sure. He has more energy than I do for sure, too. Have to admit, though, I'm still pretty energetic. Kay says Biden is an idiot, racist, and anti-poor candidate. Yeah, he is. And he should be ashamed of himself with his background. Biden voted Social Security cuts several times, I know. Bernie is polling number one in California. Yes, I know, and I was so overjoyed to see that today. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Kay says, I saw that organic farmer event too. That was terrific, wasn't it? I love that. I mean, Bernie is right on the same page with them. They could say that. They could say that. That's what the small farmers want. Because they know if they get organic farming, if that becomes the dominant form of farming, it's going to drive those big farmers out. It's going to drive them right out. Because their profit margins have been coming from all the additives and all the crap and all the chemicals and all the stuff that's killing people. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much for this energetic discussion. Please share this. And please share, like, and subscribe to my YouTube when that goes up. No glyphosate. Yes, no glyphosate. Indeed. Outlaw glyphosate. Kay says, I am a master gardener myself, so I appreciate that event big time. Steve says, sleep well, friends. And you sleep well too, Steve. Okay, tomorrow I won't have a live stream. I'll be back Saturday night at 9 p.m. And Sunday I won't have a live stream. And we'll be back on Monday. So thank you again for coming, for being here, for sharing. And thank you especially to anyone who would like to go to my Patreon page. Just remember, even $1 a month helps. And Kay says, glad I found you, Joe. Well, thank you, Kay. Glad I found you, too. Steve says, again, sleep well, friends. Okay, everybody have a good night. And I'll see you Saturday.